CGI has revolutionized filmmaking ever since its inception, being used for a simple 2D effect in Westworld, the first full computer-generated character in young Sherlock Holmes, and of course the absolute mind-blowing use in 1993's Jurassic Park. CGI was and remains a total game-changer. These days, we're continuing to advance the art form, with The Mandalorian replacing green screens with computer-generated backdrops that more directly interact with the characters within them. But we're not talking about the history of CGI today, although if you'd like to hear my velvety voice dive into that one in one of our ScreenRant docs, please let me know in the comments. Today we're talking the look of CGI characters before they become CGI characters. Okay, with maybe a little bit of history, because I can't help myself. Let's start off with one of the most adorable and badass fully CG characters in recent memory, Rocket Raccoon, who, if you've been living in a cave, stars in the Guardians of the Galaxy films and the two most recent Avengers films. They're pretty good, you should check them out. Underrated. To create Rocket, there were a few elements at play. Obviously, he's a fully CGI character, but to get the lighting just right, this adorable doll was used on screen. The performance captured for Rocket's physical movement was that of Sean Gunn, brother of James Gunn, who was so impressed by his sibling's performance that he went on to cast him in the Suicide Squad as... Oh boy. Finally, the last reference point was real-life raccoon Oreo, whose likeness and characteristics helped round out the character. Now, Oreo did sadly pass away at the age of 10 in 2019. He will be fondly remembered for being aggressively adorable. Altogether, along with the wizardry of the folks at Framestore, these elements together created one of the greatest characters in the MCU. Oh, also Bradley Cooper. Speaking of great characters, our next entry is definitely one of those two words. Way back in 1999, Jar Jar Binks made his debut in Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace. He was universally beloved, and not a bad word was said about him, and he made a great hat. The end. Okay, let's be a little respectful. I know this is the internet, which was of course created by Al Gore for the sole purpose of dunking on George Lucas, but actor Ahmed has endured a lot over the years after playing Jar Jar, and both he and the CG artists behind Jar Jar do deserve a lot of respect for crafting what was, at that point, the most advanced fully CG character we'd ever seen. And that's without a proper mocap suit, on set anyway. All of the mocap movement was done separately, with Best on set in a full Jar Jar suit and hat thing, which was digitally painted over in post. Despite his lovable antics, Jar Jar was an important step in visual effects animation.
He's embarrassing.
The same year as Phantom Menace, we actually got another extremely important CGI character backed by an on-set performance in The Mummy, with Darkman himself, Arnold Vosloo, in the titular role. And yes, I did say Darkman himself. Dude was in two of those things, and he was great. Come at me, Liam Neeson! Anyway, as you can see, Vosloo got the full ping-pong ball treatment for his fully CG appearance, which was mapped into on-set footage, and had plenty of little baby ping-pong boys to help the animators track his face for scenes like that gnarly scarab munching. Yum! Of course, neither Jar Jar nor the Mummy get as much respect as our next entry. Gollum is undoubtedly one of the greatest CGI characters of all time, and the one that is perhaps most notable in the CGI character revolution, even if again that honor belongs to Jar Jar. If we keep on playing that game though, we'll have to delve into the Abyss and that dang owl from Labyrinth, and this is just gonna get crazy. And gosh darn it, I'm just making a silly video to look at people in funny outfits pretending to be monsters and junk. Gah! For all intents and purposes, Andy Serkis and Weta Digital's astounding creation in Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers is the original gold standard for CGI mocap performances, and something that would follow Serkis throughout his career, which of course constitutes all sorts of brilliantly realized characters like Caesar and Snoke. Okay, now let's talk about Voldemort, as portrayed by the great Ralph Fiennes in the Harry Potter franchise. Yeah, I call him Ray. Is that like, look, we're chummy, man. Me and Ray, we go way back. You know, you dig? I remember being horrified of him in Schindler's List. Now, this is a series that is chock full of amazing creations, both CGI and not, but Voldemort is probably the most prescient in people's minds, mostly that lack of a honker. Where's your nose, bud? Ooh, you're trying to be a snake. That's That's cool, man. To achieve this effect, VFX artists basically had to paint out Fine's nose in every frame. To do this, they had to track his facial features and craft a CGI noggin. However, a lot of Voldy's look is practical thanks to a couple hours in the makeup chair, complete with little temporary tattoo veins on his head. Adorable. Of course, you can't talk CGI without talking about the most inexplicable second highest grossing film of all time, Avatar.
I think the thing that people need to keep very strongly in mind is that this is not an animated film.
I mean, like, sure, but also like, Ralph Bakshi would like to have a word. What's most fascinating about this kind of character animation is that it's really just a far more advanced version of rotoscoping. In fact, most of what we've been talking about and will continue to talk about is really just the next step in the evolution of that particular form of animation, which basically is just the art of shooting actors conventionally and then animating over their performances. In the early days, studios wisely combined the technique with more cartoony elements, resulting in classics like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Alice in Wonderland. Rotoscoping had a kind of disorientating effect when it was heavily used for 2D cartoons, but as the industry has evolved, it's become an important part of crafting these brilliant CGI characters. Now fast forward to Avatar and you can see just how much that simple technique has evolved from this to this. And hey, let's just be honest here, that massive cumbersome head rig and funny suit is pretty chic. Almost as much as these sick mech suits, which fight giant blue cat aliens. Why don't more people love Avatar? This is so metal in like a kind of Enya way. Of course, Avatar director James Cameron was no stranger to revolutionizing the world of CGI with his blockbuster movies. I've already mentioned The Abyss, and that Cameron flick's underwater alien was just the prelude to his most famous creation, the T-1000. Cameron's action masterpiece, Terminator 2: Judgment Day, contains shockingly little CGI. Oh, there's plenty, don't get me wrong, but most of what you see on screen are physical elements, a lot of them designed by Stan Winston's company. The CGI side of things was patched together by industrial light and magic. For example, while this shot was accomplished with a head mold and some super sick sculpting, the T-1000's horrific healing factor had to be done with computers, blowing a whole lot of minds back in 1991. The T-1000's fully CGI form, when he's just straight up liquid metal, which was based on mercury by the way, because that stuff looks like CGI in real life anyway, was done using a mix of body scan techniques that allowed ILM to replicate Robert Patrick's facial expressions and walk. Rather than using a dude covered in ping pong balls and a leotard, Patrick got to wear his birthday suit, a lovely little Speedo, and a painted grid. Talk about an upgrade, dude looks like crappy Deadpool. This version of Robert Patrick was shot with 2 cameras and used to create a sort of digital skeleton, which was rotoscoped as a fully CGI character into the scenes. Fun fact, Robert Patrick actually has a slight limp due to an old football injury, and the animators even incorporated that into his liquid metal self. That's, pretty metal. Now here's a fun one that always stuck in my mind. To create Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest, and at World's End I guess, some truly revolutionary CGI was involved. One fun fact about this complex creation is that the skin texture is based on a stained styrofoam coffee cup. So if I wanted to be a super simplistic YouTube video narrator, which I'm definitely not, this turned into this. Like, subscribe, hit that bell icon! Okay, let's do some rapid-fire characters to finish things off, starting with what is probably the most astonishing motion capture in recent years. Caesar in Planet of the Apes, of course played by Andy Serkis, as well as the many actors who joined him as his fellow apes in their uprising against those damn dirty humans. As you can see, mocap suits have evolved quite a bit since Andy's Lord of the Rings days. Marvel's Hulk is about as equally wild, especially when you consider that we started with this Incredible Hulk version in 2008 and 10 years later wound up with this borderline photoreal version in Avengers Endgame. Of course, to get these creations, the actors have to be put through some sort of humiliation. That's the only way that we can appease the CGI gods and allow for such sweet, sweet stuff. Edward Norton got a cleansing facial, while good old Mark Ruffalo got to cosplay as a gritty interpretation of Crazy Quilt. Now I could go on and on with great CGI characters, and heck, I'm straight up just skipping The Jungle Book, Dobby and Harry Potter, Dead-Eyed Grand Moff Tarkin, and a whole slew of others. Instead, I just want to dunk on bad CGI, you know? So, Twilight Saga, Breaking Dawn, Part 2, The Rise of Creepy CGI Bebe, Destined to Marry a Werewolf. Or whatever it was called. Renesmee, which, by the way, awful name, you guys. You're bad parents, you should feel bad. might honestly be one of the most cringe-inducing, horrific uses of CGI in the history of the art form. What's worse, though, is how it all started, with this thankfully scrapped animatronic version. Ah, get it away! Burn it! Burn it! Okay, that was horrifying, so let's actually just mention one more delightful bit of CGI goodness by taking a trip to the world of The Hobbit. Okay, most of the trilogy is a bit, unfortunate, but it did give us the glory that is Benedict Cumberbatch pretending to be a dragon. And really, isn't that what Christmas is all about? What video is this again? Anyway, that'll do it for this video, Screen Ranters. And if you are curious, the first use of CGI in Westworld that I mentioned way up top was way back in 1973. And while it basically just amounted to a pixelated image to represent a robot's POV, it does technically feature CGI characters if we're being really pedantic.